So welcome back to Kachwak after a long time. We're continuing with the kind of shitty guitar rebuild, and we are pretty much done with the neck. Today we're going to concentrate mainly on the Waterslide side of things, but I think I'll give you a quick rundown of what we've done with the neck so far. Number one, it was all polished up. It's got a new coating. It is scalloped, and one of the reasons I scalloped it was because the frets were actually quite nice and I wanted to give it a shot, see how well it can be done. So this is all now new. You can see the headstock is also done, and I'll give you a quick explanation because this is really what this video is about, is what did we do with the headstock. So first thing we had to do was sand it down, flat as flat can be, as smooth can be, and then it was all sprayed with white spray paint, with basically a kind of a lacquer spray paint. That was then again sanded down to be as flat and as smooth as can be, and then I applied this little Waterslide Decal from this. And then obviously there's like a ridge, and I wanted it to be completely flush so that you can see it, so that you don't actually know how this logo was applied. So what we had to do then was actually to spray lots and lots of layers of clear lacquer over it to a point, and make sure that it really dries very well, so I had to give it some time. And then once that's done, you can then go back and sand it down, sand it, so that you get it completely flush, so that there's like a, I don't know how thin this will be now, but the decal is sitting right underneath the lacquer, and you can't see anything now. Now it's nice and you know, a really nice finish. So this video is all about the decal, just a quick one to show you how it was done. Let's start in the beginning. So let's start in the beginning with the Waterslide decals. There's enough of this paper that can be bought on eBay and Amazon. And from what I've seen is there's no need to buy anything expensive. Not in this case, because you're going to be spraying the fuck out of it anyway. So whatever you get, whatever the quality of the paper, as long as it keeps the ink well, what's more important is how you actually apply it and how you then actually cover it, and with what you cover it. So as long as the Waterslide kind of printer stuff works, that's probably that. So I bought this fairly cheap stuff off Amazon. Who cares what the brand is, because really I don't even know, I can't read half of it. And I printed obviously enough on one sheet so that you don't waste the sheets. Although it's not expensive, it's, you know, why waste? And then I cut one out. You cut them out quite neatly. You can obviously, depending on your logo, you can be very kind of like precise and actually just cut the logo itself out, but I just cut it out nice and squarely, out of the logo out. And then what you do is you spray over it with lacquer, so that the inkjet, because it's water-based, ink is water-based. So you've got to kind of cover it with something, and then once it's dry, you then put it in water. It slides off the top, and you apply it to wherever you want to apply it to, and then afterwards you then are going to have to make sure it stays once it's dry. So this is pretty much how this was done. So I'll give you a quick overview how that goes. Just give us a second. So as a demo, we're going to do this very simple. We are going to take a Waterslide, spray it, and apply it to this shitty little old telephone, and then, because I can waste it, and then we can spray over that to see to lock it in place. Now a lot of people who do pedals and stuff like that, they also use Waterslides, and probably because they're so easy to use. So start at the beginning. Number one, you need to put this through a printer. Now this paper here is specifically designed for inkjets and not for the laser ones. The laser ones are kind of better because they are they can go into water without them being sealed, i.e. using a lacquer as such. So in a way they're easy to use. However, with the inkjet ones you can use color. Well, you get laser colors too, but you know, it's up to you what you buy. It doesn't really matter. So first thing we're going to do is, we've printed this out, this has not been sprayed. So ideally we cut out just one. Now when you're doing this to apply to your guitar, I would suggest using a scalpel and being a lot more careful and precise about what you're doing, obviously. But in this case, I'm just going to do it very quickly. So here is the little piece. The paper side is at the bottom, and you print on this kind of glossy side. I don't know if you can see, it's kind of glossy, and the back is not, it's just kind of like a paper. Then you take your lacquer spray and you spray it. Now what I would suggest is 3 thin layers. Let it dry, do it again, let it dry, do it again, let it dry. Now depending on what lacquer you've got, it'll depend on the drying time, obviously. So just like in any good cooking recipe demo, I have prepared one before. So it's got some layers on it. It's probably got about 2 layers, very thin. I played around with this a wee while, and before I even started using it on the guitar, and I was trying to find out how thin can I go with this lacquer. And I managed to get very thin, probably only about 2 layers. So then all you really need to do is you get your water and you dump the guy in there. And what's going to happen now is that the water is just going to soak through this kind of paper backing, and it's going to separate from the top, and your ink from your inkjet is locked in thanks to the non-water soluble lacquer. It is pretty damn simple. This takes a wee while, and you can, best thing is to just leave it for a wee while. There's a couple of things that you can make sure you prepare. So number one, have something, you'll feel it go. It's not going yet. It's probably because the water is a bit cold. If the water is a little bit lukewarm, it goes a little bit faster. In this case, you know, it's just cold water, and we're in Scotland, so the water is piss cold, not just a bit cold. So it might take a little bit longer. Anyway, a few things to prepare, maybe like a little rubbery squeegee to get rid of the excess water once you apply it, maybe like some sort of tissue paper or something that can really soak up moisture and doesn't fluff. These kind of things to be prepared with them is probably not a bad idea. Ah, there we go. I'd leave it in a bit longer. Now it does stick quite well to the surface, but oh shit! So that's the thing about a Waterslide. The application is actually, you have to be a little bit more careful than I am now. The idea is that you actually slide it off. That's why it's called a Waterslide. And I am not doing a good job of it at all. But however, this does give you a good idea of how strong the lacquer actually is. I mean, it's like, it becomes like a plastic sheet. Now, I can't be bothered to do this again, so you're just gonna have to believe me. You've got to be a little bit more patient with the water, and you've got to have it a little bit more lukewarm. That way the paper dissolves a little bit better, and the glue that's obviously holding it to the back dissolves just that little bit better, and you don't have this issue that I just had where I'm impatient and I tear the whole damn thing. So once you've applied it, you can then start getting rid of excess water. Now you've got a bit of time with this because there's like a film of water underneath, obviously, and it's got some sort of glue underneath, and it's all water soluble stuff. So you've got a bit of time to move this around and get the bubbles out, and so on and so forth. So I'm just going to speed this up. So there's a couple of things you absolutely cannot be impatient with. One of them is there's water underneath this. This decal needs to be completely dry before you start spraying anything over it. Otherwise you're locking in moisture underneath the decal itself, which I can only imagine if you do it on wood or anything like that. There will be at some point where it just starts causing problems. So this has to be absolutely dry before you then start covering it with lacquer again. So what we're going to do is I'm just going to leave this now, and it's just going to have to dry, and after that we'll carry on. So what I've done is, while we were away, I took a hairdryer to it, and I dried it with the hairdryer. Now that is actually not a good idea. Now I've done it purely because I can't be bothered waiting another 2 hours for this, or maybe even a day probably, to make sure this is completely dry. The reason the hairdryer is not a good idea is because lacquer and all these kind of things come in completely different shapes and sizes and qualities and what they actually consist of. So putting a whole bunch of heat to it is probably not necessarily the best idea. Because you don't know what will happen, especially if you've got it on a nice guitar and you fuck it all up, because the heat will start crumpling up the plastic, or possibly crumpling up the lacquer. So I'd be really careful with actually using hair dryers or anything like that. What I would rather do is just be patient, put it in a nice dry warm place, and give it time to dry properly. So once we're done with this, exactly the same thing that you would do on your guitar headstock. You would take some clear lacquer, if you can see what's actually happening right beneath, and then you spray it, and again you spray things 20-30 centimeters away, and you give it layers. And that's it, and then you wait and you do it again, and you wait and you do it again, and you wait and you do it again, because that's the only way you get nice, smooth, proper finishes. And then afterwards you'll see, now this is still wet, but you'll see that there's, I'll show you with this, you'll see that there is a ridge there, and that ridge keeps growing in a way because of the way that the spray paint goes on it and dries. And it's this ridge that I think is important to lose. So what we did with the headstock was we kept spraying it, and after the actual decal side of things was actually covered, we started spraying and concentrating more on the outside of the decal, about here, which meant that the layers started building up on both sides. So and also really important is to make sure that between every layer this lacquer dries completely. So be patient with this, and then once it was dry enough, then you start sanding it, so that you can sand it. So this side here and this side here are slightly different, and there's this ridge in between, so you have enough material that you can sand down so that you can get this flush, so that there's no ridge between the decal material and non-decal material, and that's how it then becomes one nice, lovely, smooth surface, and then you can hardly see that there was anything underneath it, or that the decal was actually like a piece and not just a nice printed silk screen or something like that. So that's pretty much how it was done. Now, maybe just a quick, this is spray paint I got from what we have here, a company called Wilco, and that's obviously not made by them. Wilco is like a cheap store for all sorts of goodies. I've tried many different brands of lacquer and spray paints and everything over the years, and I must say this is one of the nicest ones. Now, not only is this really nice, but it is actually pretty damn cheap. The black is very good, the red is very good, the white is very good. The gloss is a little bit gooey, so it takes a really long time for it to be really nice and hard. So I like be careful before you start sanding anything that you've lacquered. However, this lacquer is of such a state that you actually don't even have to really sand it. It leaves a really smooth surface. It doesn't orange peel at all. So you could get away with, if you're very patient, layer after layer and then just buffing it, you will get one hell of a beautiful finish. I didn't have that. I made a different finish. I wanted it to be kind of mattish, so mine is all sanded. Anyway, that is all from Krachtwerken today. Thank you very much. Take care.